Good afternoon. Welcome to our Facebook Live session. Um, Hopefully this talk is informative. We plan to make it informal. My name is Michael Young. I am a physician with Baptist Primary Care. I am board certified in family medicine and lifestyle medicine. And that kind of leads us to our talk today. Speaking of lifestyle medicine, for the most part, that is a medicine that's based on prevention and treatment of chronic disease states. Chronic disease states in the United States are pretty much encompasses most of our healthcare dollars. It's approximately 86% of our healthcare dollars. And when we say chronic disease states, we mean diabetes, hypertension, coronary artery disease, cancer, asthma. And like I said, this is a significant problem for our healthcare system. Typically, out of 8 out of 10 deaths in the United States is related to chronic disease states. 6 out of 10 Americans have one chronic disease state, and 4 out of 10 have 2 or more chronic disease states. And the thing is that this is highly preventable. We know that 80% of diabetes and coronary artery disease is preventable. We know that 40% of cancer cases are preventable, secondary to chronic disease states. And the tenets of when we talk about a healthy lifestyle, we're talking about non-smoking, we're talking about physical activity, we're talking about weight management, and we're talking about eating healthy. We know that less than 3% of Americans actually engage in all tenets. We know that regular exercise, we're talking about 150 minutes of moderate activity daily, or weekly, I'm sorry. And we're talking about 75 minutes of vigorous activity, 150 minutes of moderate activity weekly. And we know that less than 5% of Americans actually engage in that healthy lifestyle or that habit. And as far as obesity, we know that is a problem for the United States. Approximately 30% of Americans are obese, and we know that 70% of Americans are either obese or overweight. This is a problem that is increasing year by year. We know now that we have 9 states that actually have obesity rates greater than 39%. We know that we have 48 states that have obesity rates greater than 25%. And the thing is, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we had no states with obesity rates greater than 15%. So it's a problem that's becoming an epidemic. And then as far as eating healthy, which is pretty much the basis of our talk today when we're talking about a whole food, plant-based lifestyle, we're trying to get individuals to consume at least 7 to 9 servings of fruits and vegetables daily. And like I said, less than 3% are actually engaging in that habit. Now, what we're talking about today, whole food plant-based diet, pretty much we're talking about a diet consisting mostly or entirely of foods derived from plants, including vegetables, grains, nuts, seeds, legumes, fruits, with few or no animal products. Or simply, we're trying to eat whole foods, foods that come in their natural state. So we know that there are multiple studies that show us that eating healthy can help prevent diabetes, can help prevent heart disease, can help prevent cancer. But the problem is, like I said, we're just not engaging in those healthy habits. We know that for the most part, and I have patients that come in daily, that they think that the tenet of healthcare is actually engaging in taking pharmaceuticals. And pharmaceuticals have their place, but we know that a healthy lifestyle, eating healthy, exercising is actually far more effective than taking pharmaceuticals. We know that it's also, it helps prevent disease, it is cost effective, and you don't have any side effects from exercising or eating healthy. side effects that you get, particularly with taking some pharmaceuticals. So what we'll do is say that if there's any questions, please them in the comment section, and we'll try to answer them as we get to those. All right, so talking about whole food plant-based diet, pretty much we're talking about removing a lot of the processed foods from our diet. And we know that processed foods are pretty much foods that have been taken apart, put back together, and typically they have their sugars and oils, additives and fillers added in. We know that 70% of processed foods have sugar added to them. And in the process of processing these foods, they actually remove the nutrients and the fiber, which is beneficial. We know typically the American diet consists of approximately 70% of processed foods. We know that 25% is animal products, and the remaining 5% is actually the whole foods, the whole grains, the fruits, the vegetables. So once again, we need to work on improving our dietary intake to help combat some of these chronic disease states. So why should you actually engage into a whole food plant-based diet? Well, number one, glycemic index. Glycemic index is a term that we use on how the body actually processes glucose, particularly glucose or fructose, I'm sorry. So typically when you consume a food, you actually digest it, and you actually normally get a nice even spike of glucose. But when you eat a lot of foods that are actually processed, and typically processed foods are higher on the glycemic index. Whole foods and plant-based foods typically are lower on the glycemic index. So when you eat foods that are high on the glycemic index, such as processed foods, you get a surge in glucose, and your body uses insulin to actually insert glucose into your cells. So you get a spike in glucose. And the problem is that once you get that spike, you get a push down of your glucose, and you're hungry again. And so what do? You eat. So once again, you eat something that's probably processed or high on the glycemic index, and lo and behold, your insulin levels go up, and so you get this continued spike. The problem with having elevated insulin levels, insulin is an anabolic hormone, and it actually helps build you up. And we know that it actually causes weight gain. So you see the individuals that are actually eating a lot of processed foods, they're constantly hungry, they're constantly eating high glycemic foods, and they're causing those spikes in their insulin and glucose levels. So like I said, whole foods, plant-based, typically are lower on the index level. Also, they are full of fiber. And fiber is really important because it actually helps even out those glucose levels. It works on your satiety. It keeps you full, so you don't eat as much, and you also don't get those surges of insulin, which can cause weight gain. Also, fiber is really important because there's a term now called your microbiome. Microbiome, we know, is a bunch of bacteria, fungi, viruses in your GI tract. And there's about 100 trillion of these, and they work as an organ or organ system in your body. They are responsible for helping you digest food. They are actually responsible for regulating your immune system. They also protect you versus other disease states. They produce vitamins, and they also work on your mood. They help with anxiety and depression. We know that individuals who consume a lot of processed foods, they actually have a higher incidence of depression and anxiety. Eating whole foods where there's fiber, once again, is important for the microbiome because it actually feeds the microbiome. And we call that prebiotics. There's a lot more research um, engaged in actually how the microbiome works. And there's the other issue is that foods that are typically not healthy, processed foods, they actually feed bad bacteria, and the bad bacteria can wreak havoc on our immune system, on our mood, on our defense system, on how we actually fight off foreign or internal factors. So another issue, and I think if we can go to the next slide, that'll help me out a little bit. All right. So the next thing is whole foods typically are full of antioxidants. Antioxidants are really important when we're talking about inflammation. And this is another term that's really important when we're talking about chronic disease. It's that chronic inflammation. Chronic inflammation comes from having a poor diet, from diabetes, from high blood pressure, from stress, from smoking. We know that fat tissue itself is actually a pro-inflammatory state. And having a high inflammatory state actually leads to chronic disease. And this is another reason why whole foods are really important, because they actually provide the antioxidants that actually neutralize chronic inflammation. Typical antioxidants we're talking about vitamin C, vitamin E, flavonoids, curcuminoids, anthocyanins, copper, lycopene, lutein, and polyphenols. Polyphenols, really important. There's probably about 8,000, and these are ingredients or compounds or chemicals that are actually found, phytochemicals that are found in a lot of the whole food plant-based. And like I said, these actually help fight the chronic inflammation. Other thing is whole foods typically, and particularly when we're talking about organic foods, they actually are low in carcinogens. We know that a lot of meat, a lot of processed meat and processed foods actually are high in nitrates or nitrites, heterocycloamines, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and advanced glycation in products. And these are compounds that are known to actually be carcinogens. We know that there was a couple years ago, there was the World Health Organization actually released a statement stating that processed meats are considered a type 1A carcinogen, and eating 50 grams of processed meat daily increases your risk of colorectal cancer about 18%. We know that meats themselves are actually a class 2. And this is the International Research Cancer Association. And they actually, when we're talking about meats, we're talking about your beef, your pork, your chicken, and not necessarily being processed. But we know consuming meals that are heavy with these or frequent with these ingredients or these foods increases your risk of colorectal, pancreatic, and prostate cancer by 5%. Other, like we know, the nitrites that are actually in that are used to preserve foods, we know that those, along with the heterocycloamines and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, once the food is heated, and like I said, these are found in meats, they're found in processed foods. Once they're heated, particularly above about 266 degrees Fahrenheit, that increases your risk of turning these substances into compounds that are carcinogenic. Advanced glycation in products. This is when a protein or a fat is actually glycated, or in a simple terms, caramelized. Typically, you get that in broiling and baking and roasting and grilling. And these compounds or these products actually are considered carcinogens. And once again, you find these typically in meats and processed foods. Typically diets that are high in fruits, vegetables, whole grains, you don't find these substances or these compounds that are considered carcinogens. And then once again, they actually help aid or prevent some of these chronic disease states because of the phytonutrients, the phytochemicals and the minerals and vitamins that are found in a whole food plant-based diet. Prevent and reversing chronic disease. We know now, it used to be where we thought that your genes were your totality. But now we know that actually through eating healthy, exercise, you can actually turn on or turn off genes. So you can actually prevent, or you can actually reverse a lot of the disease states. And that's something that's really common in our practice. We have patients that are on medications or come in wanting to be on medications. And, we tell them that, all we have to do is really just change some lifestyle modalities. And our goal is not to keep you on medications, it's to actually reverse or take you off medications. So if we're not doing that, then I'm doing you a disservice, because there is a better way. There is, like we stated earlier, there is a healthier way. There is a more cost-effective way of actually treating chronic disease. And also, we know that diets that are high in whole food plant-based they actually aid in weight loss and weight maintenance. We know there are multiple studies. There is the Adventist Health Study, which shows vegans and vegetarians actually, they have lower risk of diabetes, they have lower risk of heart disease, lower risk of cancer. They typically have lower body mass index. So we know eating a diet that is full of whole food plant-based items actually aids. And once again, the fiber is something that actually aids in satiety. And then, not the last, but we'll kind of cut off here, is the idea that actually eating a whole food plant-based diet is beneficial for the environment. We know that if we can switch individuals from a animal-based to a plant-based diet, we could reduce greenhouse gas emissions and land use by 70%. We know that we can use 50% less water by engaging in a whole food plant-based diet. So what we do, I think we do have some questions here. Sarah, what about carbs? Carbs are important. We're not mandating a high protein, low carb diet. We know that actually carbs are not the issue when we're talking about chronic disease state. We know that it is typically, and for instance, talking about diabetes is more or less an issue where individuals are getting a lot of nutrients, but typically their diets are high in saturated fat. And the problem is that the saturated fat actually inserts itself into the myocellular cell, the muscle cell. And the fat actually tells the muscle cell that it doesn't really need any more nutrients or energy. And so it actually stops responding to insulin. Thus, your blood glucose levels will increase. So we know that having a diet that's low in oils and processed foods actually reduces the risk of diabetes. There is a study called the Diabetic Prevention Study where they actually set up 3 groups of people. One was where they actually engaged in a whole food plant-based diet with low oils, and they had the same amount of carbs as anyone else. And then there was individuals who were actually placed on metformin, and there was just a control group. And they found that these individuals, they were able to prevent diabetes by 58% with individuals who just actually engaged in whole food plant-based living. And this is compared to individuals who were placed on metformin, which is typically the first medication that most diabetics are placed on. So another question, if you start a baby on a plant-based diet from the very beginning by using soy formula and continue the plant-based diet as they get older, will they get all the nutrients they need? Yes. I mean, typically, all of the formulas are actually there are added nutrients to the formula. But plant-based, I think the issue, particularly with soy, is there's a belief that it increases your risk of breast or prostate cancer. We find that it's quite the opposite. We know that a soy-based, you get all of the protein that you need, and it's readily digestible. And also, there's not an increased risk of any health issues regarding certain forms of cancer. That has actually been debunked. The reason that there was a concern that soy actually could lead to certain forms of cancer is that soy has isoflavonoids, which are a phytoestrogen. And we find that actually the thinking is that certain forms of breast cancer are actually hormone dependent, and that this could actually trigger increased risk of breast cancer. We know that that's not the case. So yes, but as far as protein, in the United States, we have this concern that we actually do not consume enough protein. And not to be cynical, but typically the message for that idea is driven by individuals who want to sell you cows or beef and pork. Protein, you typically need about 0.8 grams per kilogram. So typical male needs 50 to 60 grams of protein, and that's readily available. I think if you look, a cup of beans, a cup of soy actually has somewhere between 14 and 16 grams of protein. So that's relatively easy. I think the other issue is that there's concerns regarding amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein. There are 20 amino acids, and 9 of those are essential, meaning that the body can't make them, that we actually have to get it through food. And we know that actually engaging in a food that's diverse will actually engage you with all of the proper, or all of the essential amino acids that you need. Are there websites that you can recommend that have simple recipes and ways of making whole foods? Yes, actually, there is the PCRM, which stands for Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine.org, or PCRM.org. They actually have tons of recipes. If you are someone who is actually just starting out and you need help with transitioning over to a whole food plant-based diet, if you go to the Apple or the Google store, there is the 21-day vegan starter or kickstart program. Also, there is a new program that has come out over the last few months called Switch, and it's SWICH. And it's thebigswitch.com, I believe is the website. This is a free service where you actually go through a survey, and they gauge your cooking abilities and the different dietary habits that you may have, and they actually help you with video tutorials and written recipes to help you develop meals that are whole food plant-based. I guess another question, very interesting, seafood meats too. Yes, seafood is considered a meat as well. I think seafood, for the most part, has cholesterol or saturated fats in them as well. So yes, that's considered when we're talking whole food plant-based. And once again, I mean, my goal here is not to convert everyone into becoming vegan. The goal is actually to try to get a majority of your calories from whole food plant-based. So that means if you want to add different animal sources, that is fine. It's not recommended, but it is fine. But when you are adding animal sources, you want to make sure that, particularly when we're talking about chicken and pork and beef, that it is truly grass-fed. The issue with a lot of the animal products we have now, number one, they are actually fed a lot of grain, which actually increases omega-6 in their muscle cells or in their in the end product. Omega-6 is pro-inflammatory. So we know that actually cows and chickens and pigs that are actually, they're more grass-fed or grass-fed totally, they are higher in omega-3, which is actually anti-inflammatory. The other issue is that a lot of animal products are actually subjected to antibiotics. We know that 80% of all antibiotics that are made are used for our agricultural system. And the problem with that is that when you eat this animal, you actually are also consuming the antibiotics. And that is actually extremely detrimental for your microbiome. It kills off your microbiome. So the idea, if you are, once again, going to engage, and then you also have to be careful with seafood, because a lot of seafood now, they actually find there's microplastics from contaminants in the ocean. They also know that there's mercury there, and that's an issue. And a lot of the farm-raised seafood is actually fed a lot of grain or soy products. And we find that that actually, unfortunately, it decreases the amount of omega-3 that's in the fish that's found beneficial. So yeah, but you just want to be careful. Once again, animals that are actually eating grass or are subjected to, in the water, to plankton or to algae, they're actually higher in omega-3. And so what we're recommending, or what I'm recommending today, is to try to cut out the middleman and get the benefits of omega-3 and from whole foods, plant-based diet. Other questions? Can you reverse type 2 diabetes or just prevent what you get? And what we're saying is, yes, you can reverse type 2 diabetes. Dr. Neil Bernard, who is the founder of the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, has a book called Reversing Type 2 Diabetes, all through whole food plant-based. And like I said, once again, there's not an issue if you're eating the whole food plant-based diet. There is not an issue as far as being concerned about consuming too many carbs. Typically, the carbs are complex, and once again, the diet is low in saturated fat and processed oils, so that actually aids in your body as far as regulating your insulin and glucose levels. If considering switching to a plant-based diet, would you recommend easing into it or going all in from the start? Definitely recommend easing into it. We know that some people actually get turned off if they go into it too quickly, particularly if they're consuming a lot of fiber that they're not used to getting. Normally have issues with abdominal bloating or cramping. But we find if you ease into it, those symptoms typically are non-existent or very minimal. So yeah, so any other questions? Do you find a plant-based diet to be more expensive? No, we do not. Unfortunately, in the United States, and my box, we make processed food extremely cheap. It's subsidized by the government for high fructose corn syrup and for individuals to actually eat a lot of poor or poorly dense nutrient or poorly nutrient foods. So typically, I mean, if you think about it, I mean, oatmeal, great breakfast, really cheap. Beans are really cheap. You know, I think when you start talking about it being expensive, typically, particularly when we're talking about vegan or vegetarian, we're talking about, unfortunately, foods that are actually processed. I mean, very popular now, I know Beyond Meat and Impossible are processed plant-based products. And yes, they're great for the transition, but not ideal for individuals who want all of the benefits from a whole food plant-based diet. Any other questions? I think I answered everything. Hopefully this was beneficial for everyone. And I think there are not any other questions. Like I said, we are based here at Tapestry Park. We are accepting new patients. And once again, this is lifestyle medicine is the basis of our practice here. But once again, we don't actually shortcut proper care or evidence-based medicine. So we actually engage in that too. But once again, the idea is to actually help you with nutrition, help you with physical activity, prevent you or help with smoking cessation. Dealing with stress is really important. Sleep is really important. One thing, in the United States, we kind of we wear this badge of honor about the lack of sleep that we get, that we're working so hard. But we know that sleep is really important, particularly when we're talking about issues related to weight. We know that the appetite hormones like leptin or ghrelin are actually regulated by your circadian rhythm, which is regulated by your sleep. So that's another issue with our higher obesity rate, is that we're not getting enough sleep and not getting proper sleep. If that's it, I think that we'll end here.